Quite some time ago now, I did this thing where I gave kind of advice around Comicsgate to people as it was kicking off, because I went through Gamergate. And I think it's time to revisit that, because the whole Comicsgate thing seems to be blowing up a lot more than it already was. So I want to give advice to both sides, and I'll start with the professionals, the social justice-y types, the companies. The people who are criticising you, the people who are part of what you might call Comicsgate, that's your core audience, that is your main audience. These are the exemplars of the people who have collected since they were kids. These are the people who are your bread and butter, and you ignore them at your peril. There seems to be an attitude that you don't work for your customers, and that's not true, at least not in the field that you're in, which is supposed to be mass market. I mean, there's a lot of problems that you've got in comics. Marvel and DC both seem to be failing to cash in on the movies because their comics are so completely different to the movies. So even while the movies do fantastically well, trading off a lot of this nostalgia and your core audience and this mass market that's definitely there, you're not cashing in on it. And that's a problem, and it relates to this because the comics content that you're putting out is more akin to the kind of thing that used to be or should be found in the indie comic scene, the kind of experimental, weird social commentary focused type stuff. And you know, that can be great, but it only gets an indie comic audience. And what are you getting? You're getting indie comic level sales as a direct result. You have this bubble of creative people who are out of step with your audience, and when your audience rises up to tell you you're not doing what they like, you call them racist, you call them sexist, you call them misogynistic, you call them homophobes, whatever. And that's not true if you actually listen. And this would be my main point of advice, would be to cut through the trolls and listen to the people like Diversity in Comics and so on. Listen to what they're actually saying, what they're actually criticizing, rather than just going off because you assume, and it is an assumption, that they are bigoted or conservative. I mean, I'm far left, but conservative shouldn't be an insult any more than liberal is. You know, they're just positions on political subjects. You can have heated arguments and so on, but the term itself is a descriptive. And of course you're going to have conservative fans. A big pillar of comics, particularly American comics, is this strand of patriotism that runs through it. There are many forms that can take. You're sacrificing your core, projecting a message, and letting the message take over the comic to become propaganda at the expense of story, at the expense of character. And it's not that comics can't be political, they have been massively in the past, but it's always been through the form of allegory, like in the X-Men as an allegory for race relations and issues. When Alan Moore injected his politics into his books, he didn't directly preach anarchism in V for Vendetta. He had V make the arguments for him and be an ambiguous figure. You know, good, doing the right thing, but still a terrorist, and still loopy and weird and out there. It's like the audience holds what you do in greater respect than you do. And comics have tackled difficult subjects before, spousal abuse, drug addiction. All that. It can be done, but it has to be done well, and it can't be dripping off every page, and it can't be preaching to people. People go to comics for escape, and that doesn't mean you can't bring some grit into it, but you have to do it well. And that's really the crux of their argument, is that they don't like being preached to, and they want you to do things well, and you're not. So turning to the Comicsgate people themselves, I see you making some of the same mistakes that Gamergate did early on. There's going to be a lot of trolling, and you need to be focused upon disowning that, disassociating yourself from it as best you can. If you're going to use Twitter and so on to make direct contact with creators and so on, you're going to be blocked. There's going to be block lists going around, so alternate accounts are a must, but keep your powder dry until you think you really need it. Try to be polite in your dealings. That gets people to let their guard down, and maybe they'll listen a bit more. Sometimes you have to get verbally rough, but by and large it's better to be polite. Do a survey on people who associate with Comicsgate and see what political leanings they have. Gamergate turned out to be very much left libertarian. I suspect Comicsgate will too. So yeah, that's worth to dispel this myth that you're all racists or fascists or alt-right or whatever. You know, as long as you're somewhere in the centre, you can use that as propaganda of your own. Don't make blacklists. I've seen a blacklist circulating, and that is really a bad idea. Because it allows people to feel victimized and to point at who you're blacklisting, and you might be blacklisting them because their work is shit, but they will just see that, oh, this creator's a woman, or this creator's black, or this creator's gay. You know, they don't understand that all of these kinds of people are human beings and can be shit as well as they can be good. So far better to whitelist when you find a title that's good, spread the word around, and boost sales of that comic, of that character, of that writer, of that artist, things that you like. That's the best way to go about it. One thing that did work really well for Gamergate was jumping on hashtags. So when there's a comic convention or any hashtag that comes up related to comics, get on that shit and spread your word. Leadership has its benefits and its drawbacks. I mean, you clearly have spokespeople like diversity in comics. I don't know whether you have leaders. We tried not to. Some people tried to set themselves up as leaders. Didn't tend to go too well. Rather, it was better to keep the movement kind of disorganized and emergent, so that it could react to things in its own way, in its own time, and there wasn't anyone trying to boss everyone around and make them agree. But still, you do need an idea of what you want, of what your goals are. You know, we had ethics in games journalism, which is a broader subject than you might think, and tied into that was anti-censorship and so on. So what do you want? What are your principles? You know, what can you argue for? What's an achievable thing that the companies could do to correct their course in your view? Have an idea of what you want. The press is not going to be on your side, so you need alternative outlets. If there are smaller comic sites that are more sympathetic, build them up. You know, give them your custom, give them your clicks. Start sites of your own, start comics of your own, webcomics, whatever, to show the kind of things that you like and maybe can make a success of. But don't let them get hijacked by people like Vox Day or whatever, because they're just bad for your image, and they're probably not going to come up with anything that's really good, because they're propagandists just from a different side. Connect with each other, that's a big thing. Get to know each other, follow back everyone who's involved in the hashtags, and make a community, because you're going to need support from each other. That's about it. I mean, if you want an insight into how Gamergate went, the things that went wrong, the things that went right, the background that it emerged from and everything, because a lot of it does relate to you, then I did write a book called Inside Gamergate. Now obviously it's biased because I was involved, but it's the closest thing to an unbiased account that you're going to find out there until Brad Glasgow finishes his book on the subject. So I think it could be useful for some of you on both sides to read that. And of course I get paid when you buy it, so I have to shell it. But yeah, good luck to both sides. Try and listen to each other and address each other's actual issues rather than pretending there's something else or straw manning, and that will get you a lot further. Communication is key. I don't hold out much hope, but we can hope. Zang. It's been called misogynistic, racist, a hate group, reactionary. It's been blamed for Trump, for keeping women out of games and technology. None of this is true. If you want the real story, then you need to buy Inside Gamergate.